Hey guys, this is Yeager with Mettle. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a 360 scene using Mettle FreeForm Pro with GeoLayers 2. You can use this method to create a nice 360 landscape animation, or you can also create some equirectangular environment maps and reflection maps. Now in this tutorial, we're going to be using two third-party plugins, but you can easily download free trials of both of them to follow along. Again, the plugins we're going to be using are Mettle FreeForm Pro, which you can download from mettle.com. And the second plugin is GeoLayers 2, which is from aescripts.com. I'll have links to both of those in the description of this video. I do want to note that this is an updated tutorial from a previous one I created. This one takes advantage of the new 360 VR effects built into After Effects to export our 360 scene. I'm also going to include a new project file that you can download for this tutorial that will have a 360 scene already set up, that if you want to go ahead and break that down and look at it closer, you can as well. Alright guys, let's go ahead and jump into After Effects. Alright guys, once you've downloaded and installed both of the plugins, we need to go ahead and launch GeoLayers 2. And we're going to come up here to Window and Extensions and then GeoLayers 2. And that's opened up right here. It's a dockable panel. And now we can see that. Now occasionally you'll have a splash screen that appears above this, and you can just dismiss that and you'll see this UI right here. Now we need to go ahead and set up a 3D scene. So you'll see this plus icon here with a little tab. Go ahead and click and hold that, and then I'll go ahead and open this up. And then you're going to see 3D landscape, and again we're going to click this, and then we're going to select Mettle FreeForm Pro, and then just go ahead and launch that here by clicking this again. And that's going to go ahead and automatically create this composition. You'll see it opened up three compositions here. We have a 3D landscape, a height map, and a texture map here, and all of those are inside of this 3D landscape comp as well. Now we're going to be using this 3D landscape in a little bit different method than it would be traditionally. So we're actually going to come in here and delete a few of these layers. First thing I'm going to do is turn off the visibility of the control layer. Then I'm going to select the height, tilt, and camera layers here. I'm just going to hold shift, select all of those, and just go ahead and delete those. Next, we want to go ahead and resize this composition. You'll see right now it's 16 by 9. If I zoom in here, I'm going to go ahead and right click over here and go to composition settings. And when we select that, it's going to open this up, and I'm going to change the width here to also be 1080, so we want it to be square, so 1080 by 1080. And then while I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and change the frame rate to be 30. And then you can also adjust the duration if you want to as well. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now we can go ahead and create a camera. So I'm just going to right click over here again in the gray area and go to New Camera. And I'm just going to have this be a 15mm preset camera and click OK. So now if I zoom in here and I hit C on the keyboard, we can navigate around with the camera. And actually I'm going to go ahead and turn off the adaptive resolution. And actually let's go to a custom camera view, and we can see kind of what's happening. So default, the map is kind of set up, you can see vertically here, and that's really to go with the previous camera controls. So we want this to look, like normal flat terrain, just be kind of flat here. So what we need to do is come down here and you're going to see TX, that composition, that's for texture. I'm going to click that, and if we come here to Effects Controls, that's actually the layer that has FreeForm Pro on it. So come over here to 3D Transform, and if we go down here to Rotate X, I'm just going to type in -90. And when I do that, you'll see it rotates the terrain back down to kind of normal. And then you're also going to see this grid here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the grid and controls, turn off the display of that. And just by rotating the custom camera view here, I can see our camera we added into the scene is below the FreeForm Pro layer. So I'm going to select that camera, and I'm just going to move that to be above the ground surface there. So let's go back to our active camera view. And now if I hit C on the keyboard, we can navigate around, we can look around now, we can see the terrain. Now one thing to note, this is kind of the default location where it's going to create when you create a 3D location with GeoLayers 2. And I'm just going to leave it as is for right now. We will jump to a new location later, but I'm just going to leave it here because I know everyone's going to have this scene as their starting point. Now if we go ahead and move the camera around and we look at the terrain a little bit closer, you'll see the textures are, very low quality at this point. And that's because we haven't finalized any of the textures. Usually when you jump to a new location or create a new scene, you're going to have very basic textures added, and that's just really so we can have the most speed when we're looking around at this scene. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like with the higher resolution textures just added to this current map. And the way we do that here is you're going to see Finalize Linked over here in the GeoLayers 2. And you'll see it has a little tab there as well. So I'm going to click and hold on this, and that's going to launch this other control bar here. And what we need to do, sometimes off default, this may not be checked on. So check on Use Global Finalization Quality. And I like to set the quality on that up to 100%. And then for the analyzation accuracy, I like to set that around 90%. And then you'll also see this tab. Just go ahead and click that down and make sure you select Finalize All. And so when I select that, I'll click Finalize All right here. And then GeoLayers is going to go ahead and run through its thing. And what it's doing, it's pulling those tiles down and putting them into this After Effects composition. It's pulling them from online, and we'll see this update really quickly. And now we can see it's much more detailed. And if I go ahead and zoom in here, we'll see, again, we get a lot more detail and resolution on the map. And that's very important when we render this out in 360, because people are going to have the ability to look around anywhere in the scene. And so there's no way we can really frame the scene where we can't see, you know, the textures that might be low resolution. So it's definitely key to have the textures be as high res as possible for this. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK here to close that up. Now, one thing I do want to mention is with FreeForm Pro, you can add in lights. So if you want to add in parallel lights or spotlights or ambient lights, you can do that. Now, I typically don't do that, just leave it on the default. And the reason I do that is because there's already some lighting baked in on these textures. Because again, these textures are satellite photos from something like Google Maps, for example. And you can see there's already some shadowing occurring on the back side of these mountains. And so you will see shadows already kind of baked onto the textures. And if we add in lights, it's just going to kind of compete with those, and it may not look as realistic. So for me, to get the most realistic results, I just leave it as is with the default lighting. If you do want to make adjustments, what I recommend doing is just really adjusting the color grade, and again, not the actual lighting itself. Now we need to go ahead and adjust the next step of the process here. You can see our map. It's very detailed, but it's not very big, especially for a 360 scene. So we need to make this area much larger. And in order for us to do this, we have to really jump into some of these compositions and manually change the size and resolution of them. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, so just make sure you follow along with each of these steps. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But you'll see in the 3D landscape comp, we have the texture comp and we have a height map comp. And you may see these both already open up here at the top, but I'm just going to double click into each one of these as we go through this process. So first, let's go ahead and jump into the texture comp. So I'm going to double click. And now inside of that, you may see something that looks a little weird here. Go ahead and adjust just where the current time indicator is, and that'll go ahead and refresh and cache that out, and you'll see the textures here. So if we zoom in, you can actually see all the textures that we've got pulled in here, and again, here you can see those shadows and all those details. You're gonna see some text, and that's the attribution text. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the visibility of each of those. They'll usually be at the top right there. So when I zoom out here, what we need to do is we need to adjust the size of this texture composition. So I'm gonna right click over here in the gray area, and we'll go to composition settings. And this is going to pop that up, and you're going to see the width and the height are both 2000 pixels, and I want to make that larger. Now, how big you want to make this is up to you. Whatever size that you do decide on, you'll need to stick with that throughout the entire, basically, workflow that you're going to work through on this 360 scene. I've done some all the way as high as 8K, but what I really feel gets kind of a good balance is going to be 4500 by 4500. So I'm going to click on the width and type that in, 4500, and for the height, I'll also change that to 4500. And go ahead and click OK. And now we can see this total surface area we've got here is going to be a little bit more than 4 times what the original one was. So this will be quite a bit larger. However, when we do that, you're going to see inside the texture comp, we have another comp down here called texture, and this is where it gets a little confusing. You can see when I click on that, you can see it actually highlights the texture there. So we need to double click into this as well. And when we do that, you're going to see the actual individual tiles that make up this total scene. So when GeoLayers is pulling those tiles in, the textures, this is where it's placing them and aligning them all up, so I can actually move some of these, you can see, and then we can see how each one of those is comprised. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z to undo that movement. But what we need to do is, again, resize this composition as well. So just over here in the gray area, I'm going to right click, go to Composition Settings, and again, change this to be 4500 by 4500. And we can zoom out and you can see that's resized that as well. So now let's jump back over to the 3D landscape composition. And when we do that, you may see it adjust the terrain a little bit more. It becomes visible. Ignore that for the time being. That's just because it's adjusting based off the height map and the texture maps. So now let's go ahead and jump down here into the height map composition. So I'm going to double click into that one as well. And when we jump into this one, we really just need to repeat that same process. So I'm just going to come over here to the gray area, right click, go to composition settings, and change this to be 4500 as well for the height and the width. And we have a few extra steps inside of this one. You're going to see inside of this comp, I've got the text attribution here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the visibility of each one of those off again. But you're going to see a layer called Channel Red. I'm going to select that layer. And what I need to do now is I need to resize this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with it selected, come up here to Layer, and come down here to Transform. And you're going to see Fit to Comp. So just select that. And you're going to see Value Range. You need to do the exact same thing. Select that. come up here to layer, transform, and then fit to comp. Now below that, you're going to see two more compositions. Again, this is just a little bit confusing because they have similar names, but these are actually duplicates, or this height map 2 is just a duplicate, so don't worry about that one. What we need to do is select height map down here, double click into that one, and if we zoom in here, you're going to see we have those same tile type setup like we did for the other texture. You can see where this is comprised. So again, that's just pulling in the height map. So again, right click over here in composition settings and change this to be 4500 by 4500 and go ahead and click OK. All right, now that's the most difficult part of this tutorial by far. So let's go back over to 3D landscape. And really that's just now all the work's been set up and done, and now we can see our terrain. You may see a little bit of kind of weird fraying around the edges of the map, and that's perfectly natural for that to be occurring. I'll show you how we can get rid of that in just a little bit. But what we want to do now is I'm going to zoom out here with the camera, and we come back over here to GeoLayers 2. I'm going to select my texture comp and just like to have it selected whenever I run this next process. We're going to refinalize everything, and that's going to pull in new tiles for all that extra area for those resized compositions that we created. So under Finalize All here, I'm just going to go ahead and click that. And you're going to see it's going to pull in a lot more tiles. This may take a little bit of time. All right, so once that finalizes, we should see this refresh with a bigger map. It pulled in over 100 tiles for each of those. Now we can see how that's expanded. We have a much bigger sandbox here. If we go ahead and rotate around this and look at this, you can just see it's a much larger area. And if we zoom in here, we will see we have some really nice detail on these textures. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now again, that process takes a little bit more time when you're pulling in that many tiles. I think it pulled in over 100 tiles for each of those. So now, before we add in our 360 camera, what we need to do is we need to get rid of this weird kind of displacement around the edges. And also, because this map area is square, I really prefer it to be a circle. That way we just kind of have an even fall off. If the camera isn't directly in the center, everything at the edge is kind of an equal distance from the camera, and just gives you a much more natural looking horizon line. So I'm going to show you guys how we can go ahead and tweak that really quickly. So what we need to do is we need to come back down here to the texture composition. So I'm going to double click into that one. And again, when we jump into that one, you may see a little bit of a cache error like this. Just go ahead and move the current time indicator, and that'll refresh, and now we can see the actual textures here. So it's super simple to make this circular. I'm just going to right click in the gray area and go to New Solid. And I want this to be completely black down here for the color. Click OK. And then I'm just going to click on Make Comp Size and click OK. And I want this black texture to be at the very top here of the stack. And what we need to do now, come here to the Mask tool. I'm going to click and hold, and you'll see Ellipse tool. Go ahead and select that. And then just with that solid selected, I'm going to double click on this. And that'll create a circular mask right there on that solid. Come down here and just go ahead and change this to be Subtract. And now you can see we've changed this now to be a circular texture. So if we jump back here to 3D Landscape, we'll see it's now going to cut off those edges. Now we still have a little bit of weird displacement at the kind of these corner areas here. And in order to adjust that, let's go over here to the height map composition. So double click into that one. And what we're going to do here is just the same process. So right click, create a new solid. Again, make sure it's black, make sure it's comp size, and go ahead and click OK. And again, I'll add this at the very top of everything. And with it selected, I'll just come up here and double click on the Ellipse tool. And that gives us that circular mask. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to change this again to be Subtract. And we want to actually add a little bit of feathering around the edge of this mask. Again, just kind of help with that displacement. So I'm going to come down here under the mask. And for mask feather, I'm going to type in 50 pixels. And then for mask expansion, I want to type in -50. And let's go ahead and jump back over to the 3D landscape. And when we do that, you're going to see we get this nice kind of bottle cap result. You can see as we kind of rotate around this way, it kind of caps the terrain there. And again, that just helps us for our camera that's going to be directly in the center. If I just zoom in here and kind of emulate that, it just helps us kind of with the horizon line area if we look around this area. Now, depending on how realistic you want your scene to be and how accurate you want it to be, what I prefer to do actually is to adjust the height map here of everything so the mountains or whatever terrain I have kind of pops up a little bit more. Just kind of exaggerates that. I think it looks a little bit nicer when you render it out in 360. So I'm going to zoom out here just a little bit so we can kind of see the terrain. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to come down here to the height map composition again. And inside of the height map composition, you're going to see we have that value range layer. When I select that, come here to Effects Controls, and you're going to see we have a curves effect here, you can see. And if we look here, the areas that are brighter red are going to be the higher elevations, and the darker they are will be the lower elevations, and completely black will be kind of like sea level. So I come here on the curves effect, I'm just going to pull this top point over a little bit. You'll see that's kind of brightening up the reds here. I'll turn off the adaptive resolution. You can see how that kind of brightens things up. And so now if we jump back over to 3D landscape, you're going to see how this affects the terrain. You can see how it kind of boosted everything, just exaggerated a little bit more. And that also helps to hide the horizon line around the edges there. Again, just kind of making it feel like it's more expanding terrain. It just kind of continues off into infinity. But again, this is really up to you on how you want to kind of tweak the elevation and displacement. I'm going to go back to the height map composition, and I may even adjust the bottom point as well to make the blacks a little bit darker, so it's just a little bit more of a drastic difference. So let's jump back over to the 3D landscape, and you can see how they just tweaked it a little bit there. Now the next thing that I like to do overall for this is I like to kind of tweak the edges of the terrain, again, the horizon line, to be more of a bowl shape. So it just kind of makes everything go up right near the edges, so the camera's kind of sitting a little bit lower into the actual terrain. Again, just hiding that horizon line. Again, this is completely optional if you want to do this, but I typically will do this with my scene. So if we go back to the height map composition, what I'm going to do to create that bowl shape, I'm going to come over to the gray area, I'm going to right click and do a new adjustment layer. I want to move this all the way up to the top, just below that black solid. And on that layer, I'm going to apply the effect, color correction curves. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to boost kind of the highs here a little bit, and you're going to see it's going to make everything a little bit brighter when we do that. Now what we need to do after we do that, with that layer selected, I'm going to again double click on the ellipse tool here. That's going to create a circular mask. And then if we come in here to the mask options, the first thing I want to do is change the mask to be subtract. And then I'm going to bring the mask expansion down into the negative here, maybe like negative 240. And you're going to see it's going to give us this brighter ring around the edge. And really what that's doing is just going to elevate everything around the border of our terrain. So if we jump back over to 3D landscape right now, we're going to see we get this really drastic height difference. You can see how that kind of simulates that. But this can really help you to exaggerate mountains in the distance. Now obviously we don't want it to be that drastic, immediate of a change. So come back over to height map, and what we're going to do is adjust the mask feather here. I might change this to be something like 200. And that's just going to gradually feather that out, but again, kind of elevating everything around the edge. So let's jump back over to 3D landscape. And you'll see it just kind of tapers everything and makes it look a little bit nicer all the way around the edges. Now one thing I can see on these mountains, they're getting a little bit kind of like pixel sharp back here. So let me show you what we can do to fix that. We're going to come back over here to the texture. We're just going to have FreeForm Pro on it. And what we need to adjust is the tessellation here under the tessellation options. The default's going to be 500. We can change this now to be 1000 for the subdivisions. And when we do that, you're going to see it's just going to round off everything a little bit nicer. And again, you can increase that more or less. And depending on what your terrain is going to be, will really depend on how much you want to tweak that. One more thing before we actually add the 360 camera into this scene, if you have any flat areas like this over here, you can see where this river is flowing through. And we can see it just is kind of more of a drastic cutoff right there. You can come back into the height map composition. You can manually kind of add in some brighter spots to kind of just help offset that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click and do a new adjustment layer. I'll just have that be at the very top. And again, I'm going to apply the effect color correction curves to that. And I'll just go ahead and increase this here, make it a little brighter. And you'll see it affects everything overall. We're going to add in a mask here. So with that adjustment layer selected, I'm going to select the pen tool. And I'm just going to zoom in here, and I can see this black area here. I know that's where that flat terrain is. So what I might do is just draw a little bit, just kind of a random shape on top of this. And what we can do, we'll see this kind of brightens it up where that brighter layer's coming through. I can change kind of how this looks. And this may be a little too exaggerated there. You can see it's just subtly a little bit brighter. And what I want to do under mask, I'm going to hit MM on the keyboard for mask feather. I'll set that to be something like 50. But you'll see how this just kind of warps the terrain a little bit so it's not quite as flat in that area. Instead, you can manually adjust height maps if you need to. So let's go back here to 3D landscape. And if we look up there, you can see I kind of created a little bit of a ridge right in that area. So again, I could continue to adjust this if I wanted to. Just manually offsetting the terrain in different ways. And we can see that there. That's a little bit obviously too exaggerated. So what I would do is just to bring that overall down would be just to lower the brightness on that a touch. And you can see how that pulls that back down. But that's just an extra tip if you do want to manually adjust the terrain features yourself. All right, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to close up this other texture and height map compositions that opened up just so it's a little less busy. So now what we want to do is we want to add in our 360 camera to this scene. So we can now go ahead and delete that temporary camera that we use just in the kind of creation of our landscape. So I'll delete that. And you'll see the default views now below the FreeForm Pro layer. That's perfectly fine. But what we need to do in our 3D landscape with that selected, come up here to composition. Then you're going to see VR. And then we need to select create VR environment. So when I select that, we're going to get this pop-up menu here. And the first thing we need to do is select the composition that we want to create our 360 scene with. And I'm going to come here and select 3D landscape because that's our main composition. And then down here we have a few other options under camera settings. I like to leave the 2-node camera on. I also like to check on use a 3D null camera controller. And then finally under advanced settings, check on that I am using 3D plugins. And then after you have those selected, go ahead and select generate VR output. Now I intentionally wanted to run into this bug just in case you guys do as well. So I want to show you this. So I'm just going to move this off to the side for create VR environment. You can see it says this effect requires GPU acceleration. So if this does pop up for you, it's very easy to fix. Just come over here to File, then under Project Settings, under Video Rendering and Effects, changes to be Mercury GPU acceleration, and go ahead and click OK. We can now see that we have a 360 equirectangular composition. Now, right now, this doesn't look quite like that, and I'll show you why that is. So let's jump back over to 3D landscape. And if we come over here to a custom camera view, and if we rotate around, we will see the 360 camera rig that has been created is actually located below our terrain. You can see that there. And again, this is very common for this to occur, so I just want to kind of show you this so you know what to do if you run into this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move our camera above the terrain, but again, when you do this, it's very important to make sure you use the VR camera controller, that null object, and don't physically grab the camera itself. So I'm just going to select this and pull this above the terrain. If I just kind of zoom out here and look at this from a different angle, we can see if this is above everything. And to me, it looks like it is. So let's go back to our active camera view. This is going to be the forward-facing view from our 360 camera. We can see it is above the terrain. However, if yours is not, just hit P on the keyboard with that camera controller selected, and you can manually adjust the height right here as well. You will want to be a little bit further off the ground because if you get really close, again, those textures will start to fall apart. But just if you're somewhat up in the air, you'll get pretty good results as far as the texture quality goes overall. Now, once we've adjusted the camera, just come back over here to create VR environment. If you did close this, don't worry about it. Just come back over here to composition VR, and then you can open it back up from right here. I already have it open, but again, just make sure you have your same composition selected, and you are going to want to make sure you have each of these options selected as you did the first time. Otherwise, it could run into a bug or something like that. So I'm just going to refresh the VR output. Now we can see we have a full 360 equirectangular rendering of our GeoLayers scene that we created, again, using GeoLayers and FreeForm Pro. Now, again, as it is right now, it does have an alpha channel. If I click this, you can see, so there's nothing up here in the sky currently. So very quickly, let's go back over to 3D landscape, and I'm gonna show you a few other options you can tweak here to get better results. So let's come back down here to texture. And what I'm gonna do under FreeForm Pro, you're gonna see we have an environment option here. If I go ahead and check that down, and you're gonna see we have an option for fog. And I really like to add in some fog to give this more of a realistic fall off. So I'm gonna select the fog color here, and I'm just gonna make it kind of a lighter gray. Click OK, and then for fog type, I'll change that to be linear. And I'm gonna come down here and adjust the fog near and far. So for near, I might set this to be something like 200. You'll see some of that fog start to roll in. And I'm gonna change the fog far to be something like 3,500. So now you can see we're getting some fog as I rotate the camera around, kind of on these far mountains. And again, you can adjust this to taste depending on what the kind of look you want to get from this. So I might bring this to be something like 3,000. You can see how that kind of just rolls in a little bit more fog. Now, if you want the mountains to kind of roll off into infinity, this is the way you would want to do that. You can see as I add that fog in here, I'm actually going to adjust the camera height back up a little bit higher as well. I'm going to rotate this. Now, if you want the mountains to fall off into infinity with the fog and have the sky be the same color gray, it's very simple to do as well. This only works with a single color layer if you're going to do this. So I need to add a new solid into this scene. So I'm going to zoom out here because this composition is really large. So I'm going to go to new solid, And then for the color, I'm going to use the color picker here to select the same color as the fog color. I'll select Make Comp Size and click OK. Now I want to place this solid directly behind everything in this 360 comp. Now again, this only works if it's a single color, will not work if it's a gradient. You'll get weird results. But because it's a single color, when we refresh this VR output, you're going to see what this is going to do kind of in our final output. So I'll just go ahead and select Refresh VR Output. And when I do that, you're going to see it's going to fill up the entire sky with that gray fog. And you can see how that kind of blends nicely and just kind of helps make this look as if it stretches out much further and just tapers that area off. Now, of course, you don't have to do this. So let's jump back over to 3D Landscape, and I'll show you another alternative method. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to just turn off that solid we added. And for the texture on the fog, I'll change this to be more of a sky type color. And I'm going to bring this down, or actually a little bit higher, so it's not affecting that quite as much. Now what we can do after I've made that adjustment is just come back over here, refresh the VR output again. And when we make the jump back here to our 360 output, you'll see we have that alpha channel back on this footage. And what I like to do is I'll drag in an equirectangular sky and just place that as the background on everything. So I come over here to the project, I have just a sky equirectangular background. I just drag and drop this in. I'll place it behind the VR conversion. And you can see it appears behind everything here. So you could color correct that and make adjustments on it to give you that entire 360 scene. Now, one thing I do want to look at really quickly here, you'll see the 360 environment map I brought in is much larger than our current composition. So we have two options here. I could just go ahead and fit this size to comp for this to make it fit the background. But actually what I want to do, I'm going to actually delete that. And if we select the VR conversion, come over to the effects and controls, you'll see we have an output frame width. And right now it's at 3240. I'm going to change this to be 4096, which is a much more common, typical 4K output. And when I adjust that, you'll see it resized everything. And that just so happens to be the same size as this sky. So if I drop this in, you're going to see it's going to fit perfectly now with that. So on this, I might adjust the brightness of this. So come over here to color correction and then curves and just make the sky a little bit brighter so it kind of just fits with this scene. And now you can see we have a nice 360 output with a sky added onto this. Now, if you want to animate the camera, we can do that as well. So let's jump back over to 3D Landscape. And so what we're going to do in order to animate the camera is I'm going to come over here to a custom camera view. And we're actually going to look at this from the top. And before we do that, we will need to turn off the fog for FreeForm Pro, just so we can see this a little bit easier. So under the texture there with the fog, I'm going to turn that to none for the time being. Now we can see our camera, and I'll zoom in here, and with the VR Master Camera Controller, I'm just going to hit P for position. And really what you're going to want to do if you do animate your camera's movement, whether it be directionally or with the height, you're going to want to keep it somewhat in the center of your map again, because if we get too close to the edges here, it's going to kind of break the illusion that we're working in kind of a sandbox. So for position, I'll just move this back to the very beginning of the timeline. I'll create a keyframe, and I might move this back here on the Z axis. And we'll just move forward here about 15 seconds or so. And I'll just move this closer toward those mountains. And if we come back here to the active camera view, again, you could also animate it from this perspective if you wanted to. But I'm just going to scroll through this just to make sure we do have some movement. And you can see that here as well. So let's go ahead and turn the fog back on to linear. And under Create VR Environment, let's go ahead and refresh VR Output. And once that refreshes, move that out of the way. If I just scroll through here, we should see some movement as if we are flying above the terrain. You can see that here as well. All right, guys, this is how you create a 360 animation using FreeForm Pro and GeoLayers 2 and the native immersive video effects built into After Effects. Really quickly before I leave you though, I do want to show you one other thing. If you do jump to another location, you could get caught up with a little bit of the changes that occur. So let's jump back over here to 3D Landscape really quickly. And I'm going to come back over here to a custom camera view. And again, when I do that, I'll need to turn the fog back off for this. So let's go ahead and select texture and set the fog to none. But you can see kind of the height elevation of everything here at our current location. On GeoLayers 2, let me go ahead and just move this down a little bit. I'm going to come here and under search online for a new location, I'm just going to type in the Rockies. And this is going to allow us to jump immediately to a new location. If I just go ahead and click on this square box here, you'll see it says jump to location. I'm going to go ahead and click that. This is going to run its process really quickly. And now you'll see we made the jump to that new location. However, obviously we have some really weird looking artifacts and stuff going on in this scene, and let me show you what you can do to address that. So the first thing is, if you see something like this, it probably means you're really zoomed into that scene. So just come over here to this magnifying glass and click on the negative to zoom out. You'll probably need to select this several times, again, just to really make that scene much larger. And you can see I zoomed out probably about 5 or 6 times. You can see now the terrain is kind of becoming a little bit lower, more natural the way it was before with our other location. If we go back here to the active camera view, you may still be located below the terrain though, so just keep that in mind. And I'm just going to go ahead and raise the camera above the terrain. So again, depending on whatever location you're working with may depend on the height elevation of the terrain and where your camera is located. So I just bring up the VR environment here. I'm going to refresh this again. And when I do that, we can now see we've jumped to this new location and we now have our new 360 equirectangular export here. All right, guys, again, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm planning on creating another follow-up tutorial. It'll be much shorter than this, but show you a few other fine details and techniques you can use and other third-party plugins you can use to really bring out the most when you are creating a 360 scene using FreeForm Pro and GeoLayers 2. Again, this has been Charles Yeager from Mettle. Thanks for watching.